Welcome. My name is Lyman Goodrich and I am the producer for today's IT Unity webinar. Thank you for coming to our webinar entitled Improving Business Process Management with SharePoint. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Craig Yellick. For over 30 years, Craig Yellick has dedicated himself to researching and delivering IT solutions with a laser focus on cost-effective business growth. Craig is the Senior Solutions Architect and co-founder of Alto Consulting and Training based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Craig is the author of several books on software development, countless white papers, newsletter articles, and well over a dozen multi-day technical training classes. Craig is also Alto's lead technology evangelist and has trained thousands of IT students on many different topics throughout his career. Take it away, Craig.
Thank you, Lyman. Welcome, everybody, to our seminar this morning. A PDF version of this slide deck is available in the handouts area, so if you want to avail yourself of that, you're certainly welcome to do so. During the presentation, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to chat them over in the chat window. I have a staff of folks that'll be monitoring for that. If your question can be answered in real time by one of the staff, we'll do so. Otherwise, they'll make notes and forward them to me, and we'll deal with them at the end of the presentation. All right, so today we're going to talk about business process management with SharePoint. Primarily for those of you that are currently using Excel tracking spreadsheets, you're going to learn today that SharePoint makes them completely obsolete. Every advantage that you think you're getting out of a spreadsheet is bested by SharePoint, and SharePoint adds a ton of additional value to that. If you're managing people, we're going to make you more effective at managing folks by using SharePoint to help you assist you in that process. And if you're managed by someone, you're going to be a lot more efficient in the communications that are necessary to get that done. So we're going to be covering the pros and cons of tracking spreadsheets, the benefits of converting them to SharePoint, different ways that can help you make that transition to SharePoint, and then a bunch of real-world customer examples, because everybody likes to see what people are actually doing with the product. So who am I, and why would you listen to anything that I have to say today? Well, as Lyman mentioned, I've been in the IT services industry for 30 years. Makes me feel really old, I'll tell you, but I got my start at 5 years old, so that just makes me 35. I've been a Microsoft partner for 25 years, and I really get Microsoft technology. I've been working with their technology stack since they were a DOS operating system vendor back in the mid-'80s, and so I got an angle on what these guys are up to and how to best exploit and utilize their technologies. Doing business for 30 years, I've helped over 1,000 different businesses over the years make better use of IT. And this is everything from Fortune 500 companies like US Bank and Medtronic, all the way down to little mom and pop shops that are just getting started with SharePoint for the first time in their history. I've been using SharePoint since the 2003 version. It was tough to give away SharePoint back in the 2003 era, but we hung in there because we knew it was a great platform, a great way to collaborate, a great way to get business done, and so we've been sticking with it ever since. And then lastly, as Lyman mentioned, I am a huge believer in peer review. I write books, I write white papers, magazine articles, newsletters. I like to get feedback from people so that my advice here today is not something I just made up a couple days ago and threw up on a slide deck. This is real world stuff that's actually out there being used every single day. And stay tuned. At the end of the presentation, we've got a special offer for you. We're going to do some free consulting and implementation time. $600 value, and the first 6 requests that we get for this we'll be servicing those. So I decided to try to make this webinar here at IT Unity a little extra special, so we're giving away some consulting today. Alto customers usually start along the journey with us with an initial deployment of the product. Usually it's pretty narrowly focused, trying to deliver services to enthusiastic early adopters who can bring SharePoint into the organization and really start to exploit it. Then we move into a broad adoption footing where we try to get the rest of the enterprise on board with SharePoint and taking advantage of a much broader utilization. And then finally, once SharePoint becomes sort of business critical, we try to build business solutions where enterprises start to rely on SharePoint for getting business done. Today's presentation is primarily on the left side of this slide. This is an initial deployment type of presentation where SharePoint is perhaps brand new to the organization. Very few people are using it possibly, and so this is a great way to get started with the business process management. We have a variety of different types of solutions that we deliver to customers on SharePoint. Starting with, on the left here, the information worker solutions. These are typically out-of-the-box solutions. SharePoint comes day one installed with a host of features that you can exploit to try to get work done. And so today's presentation is definitely an information worker solution type of presentation where we're going to be using exclusively out-of-the-box features that anybody can use to get started. Once you're over that particular learning curve, the next is Power User Solutions. This is where we're using technologies perhaps like SharePoint Designer and other add-ons, perhaps third-party tools that really take a slightly more aggressive and devoted user to start exploiting these tools. And then lastly on the right we have IT Managed Solutions. These are highly customized applications typically built on .NET technologies to really get you into a whole nother use of SharePoint. So again, today's presentation is on the left for the information worker type of individual. All right, so I'm going to shut the camera off here and we can focus on the presentation. And sort of a rhetorical question here is why do managers even exist? The reason they exist is because they're providing business value to the organization by managing processes, keeping things moving along. The primary mechanism here that managers exist for is a communication, gathering information from their subordinates, packaging it up, classifying it, analyzing it, and then pushing it up to the next layer to help with better business management. And so the primary mechanism over the years for accomplishing this is the wall chart. You've probably all got these floating around here. We got the big Bordeaux budget there in the lower right. Lots of excuse me, sticky notes and so on, trying to keep people appraised of where they are in a process. These are great. They're super flexible. They're multi-user. They're tough to make read-only, unfortunately. And the biggest problem is they're not terribly transportable. You have to take photos of them if you want to show them to somebody who's not physically standing in front of them. So nobody really manages large and complex projects very often anymore with this type of technology. So instead, most organizations have thrown Excel into the mix. You've all seen the ubiquitous Excel tracking spreadsheet. Thousands of these floating around in larger organizations. For a lot of really good reasons. So let's start with our first poll question here. What is your current business process management collaboration technique in your organization? What are you doing right now to manage projects? So Lyman, go ahead and throw up that poll. We've got email, SharePoint, other collaboration tools possibly. All right, so it's looking here like we've got a fair amount of SharePoint out there. Fully 75% of you are using SharePoint in some capacity. I'm very excited to hear that. It means that our presentation today is going to be actually actionable by most individuals. We've got quite a bit of email. Oh, email just surged into the number 2 position here, so a lot of that going on. And a tiny amount of SneakerNet operations, so that's good to hear as well. do a better job with SharePoint and also eliminate most or all of that, that email. All right, so the Excel tracking spreadsheet, what is it that makes it so useful? The number one thing is that it's super, super easy to create. Everybody's got Office installed on their desktops. Everybody can fire up a new Excel spreadsheet. It's already set up in rows and columns, so it's super flexible. You start typing into it basically, and away you go. If you need an additional column of information, you simply start typing. So here's a typical Excel tracking sheet. We've got a number of columns here, and if I need a new column here, if I want to go and deal with maybe assign budget amounts to this, I can simply start typing there. I've got the ability to flip this thing into the data mode and sort and filter and so on. I've got highlighting capabilities so that if something is particularly important, perhaps overdue, I can go and highlight that information to make sure that it's more visible to folks. And so that is the chief reason why everybody does project tracking with spreadsheets. It's a tool that you have at your disposal. The cons are pretty substantial here. They're file-based, meaning you have to track down the correct version of the correct file and make sure that it's visible to all of the different team members. That means if it's sitting in your My Documents folder on your C drive, you're going to be emailing that tracking spreadsheet to different individuals. You're losing track of it. You've got copies floating around. So most people who are using tracking spreadsheets end up putting them on a file share somewhere. The moment you do that, you start having versioning and access control and permission issues. Who has the rights to modify that spreadsheet? Who's got the current version of that spreadsheet? Another major drawback is that the spreadsheets are completely and utterly passive. They just sit there as bytes up on a drive somewhere. Somebody has to open up the spreadsheet, look at something, and react to the information inside that spreadsheet. So if I made a change that's critical to the enterprise, I changed a due date, I modified a task that's been assigned to me, and I hit the save button, nobody has any idea that that happened. Somebody's going to have to open that thing up and try to react to it. And lastly, no integration with the rest of the enterprise. While it's technically possible for Excel to pull information from different data sources and so on, this is very seldom done, especially in a tracking spreadsheet operation. So that spreadsheet is pretty much a closed environment. So what we're here today to talk about is how to move those tracking spreadsheets and do a better job of business process management using SharePoint. And so here I've got a side-by-side comparison of a SharePoint tracking list and an Excel spreadsheet with exactly the same information. You'll see that they're quite similar across the board. And so I'm going to flip over to a live demo here. And hang on, let me get out of my slide deck here. Here we go. You'll see that I've got let me zoom in a little bit here. Pretty much looks like a spreadsheet. We've got the same sorting and filtering type capabilities. I have the ability to go into an edit mode here, and it's very similar to Excel. I can flick around and make different changes. Similar to Excel, if I need an additional column of information, I can simply add it. So if I want to start tracking, budget information on these things, I can just create a new column called budget, and suddenly my tracking system here has that type of capability. So in many respects, a SharePoint list out of the box is awfully similar to an Excel spreadsheet, making it real easy to make the transition. But we get a lot of value when we switch over to using SharePoint tracking lists. The main thing is that we have a super stable location. This is at a URL somewhere on the internet or in your intranet, and so anybody with a link to that list knows exactly where it is. That location never varies. It's the most up-to-date information at all times. We also have a very sophisticated security model. Unlike Excel, we can assign permissions on individual rows. So I can say, for example, that only the tasks that are assigned to you can be modified by you. That's very difficult, if not impossible, to do in Excel without substantial amount of programming to say that individuals can only change certain columns. I know Excel has a general purpose read-only mode that can put in for a permission management, but it doesn't do it on a row-by-row basis very effectively. We have the same sort of validation capabilities that you have in Excel are also available in SharePoint. So I can say, for example, that budget amounts can't be less than 0, date fields can't be less than today, certain fields are required, and so on. A SharePoint list is inherently multi-user. It's a web page, so multiple people can get at it simultaneously. And unlike a spreadsheet, if multiple people have a SharePoint list in use, they can make changes simultaneously without interfering with one another. In an Excel spreadsheet, when somebody hits the Save button, they save the whole spreadsheet, not just their own personal changes. Another key factor in SharePoint is the availability of versioning. In Excel, we see that the date and timestamps will change and the name of the person who last modified the file is stored, but we don't know what was changed inside the spreadsheet on a case-by-case basis. And in a SharePoint list, we have the opportunity to turn on a pretty sophisticated versioning model. So let's take a look at that. Here I've got an item here that I know has been modified. This does not look like it looked this morning, so I'm going to click on the little triple dots button here, and I see I've got a version history option. I'll pick that, and I'll see the complete history of the changes that have been made. Yesterday at 2:53 in the afternoon, this item was created, and then throughout the day today, this morning, different people have gone in and made changes, and there is the most recent change I made when I threw that budget value into there, and I see that other individuals have made their changes as well. Another advantage of using SharePoint for this mechanism is that we have Skype for Business presence awareness available. If I've noticed that Zach has been assigned to this particular task, but it's incomplete, I can hover over his presence awareness icon, and I can see that the Zach here has been offline for 239 days. That's probably why the task is incomplete. He may not even be around any longer. Hover over my own link here, and I'm in the middle of a presentation here, but it notes that at 11 I'm available, so if somebody wants to talk to me about this particular line, they know my schedule and can communicate with me. I've got all my other communication modalities here, sending email messages, making phone calls, etc. So it's a pretty slick. You just do not get that inside of a spreadsheet. If I'm here and I notice that, for example, Raku Desai is assigned to this, I have no idea, what her availability is. I have no idea what's going on. So that's harkening back to the lack of integration, as I mentioned, that Excel suffers from. All right, so hopefully you've seen enough to make it somewhat interesting to you to make this this transition. You might want to give it a try, give it a whirl. So let's talk about a couple of the options you have for moving from tracking spreadsheets into SharePoint. The first one is to directly import the spreadsheet into SharePoint. I recommend that you clean the thing up first. Excel is almost too flexible in the way that it can size columns, size rows, hide columns. You can do all sorts of crazy things in Excel that aren't going to make the transition necessarily to SharePoint. So before you attempt to import it, strongly recommend that you clean the thing up a little bit here. So I'm going to go to my site contents. I'm going to hit Add an App, do a search for the word Excel, and we'll see that we have an Import Spreadsheet option. This allows me to pick an Excel spreadsheet, and SharePoint will attempt to convert it into a rows and columns kind of a format. And that's pretty slick, but as I mentioned, you're going to want to clean that thing up a little bit before you make such an attempt. Another possibility, and one that shocks people the first time they see it, is SharePoint has an awesome relationship with the clipboard. And so you see here that after I made that conversion to SharePoint, somebody came in and added a bunch more values to this spreadsheet, and these aren't present inside my SharePoint tracking list because I didn't convert these people over fast enough, and they went and made some changes. So I'm going to hit the copy button here, and you'll see we've got the marquee rectangle going here showing me that I've got something selected. If I go back to SharePoint here, I'll go into list edit mode, hit the paste button, get my little IE warning, and there those values have been immediately added to it. And then I can go and start adding value here now by picking up different folks and so on. So as you see, we've got a really slick clipboard integration, making it almost effortless to move back and forth between the different products. My strong recommendation, though, is instead of taking a spreadsheet and just sucking it up into SharePoint or even just using the clipboard, is to study up in SharePoint features and then start fresh. There are a huge number of SharePoint features that are unavailable to you when you're using Excel. And so if you take an existing tracking spreadsheet and just chuck it into SharePoint, you're probably not going to be taking advantage of everything that's possible. So for starters, SharePoint ships with a task list template that has a lot of sophisticated process management features already set up and ready to go. And so if you begin your process by starting with a task list, you can always remove the things that you don't like, add additional fields if necessary, and then definitely take a look at all the different field types and decide whether or not they might be useful to you. So let me try that here. I got so many windows open I can't find the darn. There it is. So I'll go to Site Contents, add a new app, and here's the task list template. We'll call this trial project here just to see what it might look like. And here I've got my new trial, oops, wrong choice. Here I've got my new trial project task list here. And we'll see that we've got task name, due date assigned to, etc., sort of the typical things that you'd want in a project list. If I hit the Add Task dialog, we'll see that there's actually quite a bit more going on here. We have priority and task statuses and so on. And so these are things that you can start with to see if that's going to work for you. And then we've got all the different types of fields that can be added. Text, number, date, time, etc. Those sorts of things you're accustomed to in Excel. We have the person or group type picker. That's a nice integration. I'm going to choose more column types. And we'll see that there's a huge list of things that SharePoint knows how to do out of the box. And as I click on these, the dialog reforms itself to show you more information. So perhaps there are resources up on the corporate intranet that might be suitable for this task, so I could perhaps store a hyperlink to that, just for example. So playing around with the different column types will help you understand what's going on. We also have different validation information, for example, requiring that columns contain information, making sure that they're unique, setting upper lengths for text and so on. These are all features and functions that are very accessible when you're first getting started with SharePoint that you should avail yourself of. These are things that are not necessarily going to be in Excel, and so you might not be aware that they're there. So be a little curious, poke around and see what you can find. All right, so to help sort of guide the rest of the presentation here, I'd like to get a quick poll here on what your role is in the organization. And so Lyman, go ahead and throw up that poll. Pick your primary role. All right, well, that's good to know. Thank you. All right, that's good. It's looking like we have a majority of the attendees here are consider themselves managers. Another close minority considers themselves users, which I am going to assume implies that they are being managed, and a smattering of other role types as well. So I'm going to sort of gear the presentation sort of toward that that audience. Here are some typical pushback that I get when I try to get customers to move out of their tracking spreadsheets into SharePoint. Number one is there are people who just don't like change, right? They love their spreadsheets. They chart, they graph, they print, they know how to get things done with spreadsheets. A lot of cover your butt action going on. People like to take a copy of a spreadsheet at a point in time, save it, and say, this was the status of this project at the close of 2015. Perhaps they just want to, keep track of that. Another pushback I get is that I spend most of my day in Outlook, and I don't want to leave Outlook to get my work done. I don't want to transition over to SharePoint and then back again. Don't make me leave Outlook. Another common request is that SharePoint lists just don't print very effectively. The tiny little page that I have, if I made a screen print of those 5 or 6 tasks, obviously that's printable. But what if there were 500 tasks that spanned page after page after page? SharePoint lists just don't have a native printing mechanism, so that's a concern at some point. And then lastly, and I have to agree with this, if you're entering 2 or 3 tasks one afternoon, you're not going to be bothered by a web page. But if you're a clerical type person who has to enter status updates on hundreds and hundreds of task entries, web pages are kind of tedious to do. They don't respond as well like a desktop application does. The whole process is just sometimes very inefficient. And so these are all valid concerns, and SharePoint has answers to all of these things. Up in the toolbar, on the toolbar that's available on SharePoint lists, there's an area called Connect and Export, and we have the ability to connect to Outlook, export to Excel, open with Access, open with Project. All of these are available to us to answer all of the concerns that were just raised. So I'm going to go back to my tracker here. I'm going to go up to the List ribbon bar, and here's the Connect and Export option. I'm going to start here with Export to Excel. I'm going to get a variety of security dialogues here. This wasn't supposed to happen, but that's because it's a demo, right? This is Excel being extra cautious. Oh my gosh, now I'm getting a jeez. I don't know why this is happening. I'm sorry. X, W, M, Y, X, W. It knows I'm a robot. This is terrible. Ah, come on. All right, well, let me try this again. What you're supposed to be seeing is it should just be there we go. So here I've got a spreadsheet that was created with one click followed by a couple of security prompts, and I have a copy of this SharePoint list back into a spreadsheet. And the beauty of this thing is that it is also a live link to SharePoint. So this is not a one-time copy. I have a refresh capability here, so that if somebody were to go in and make a change here, so I'll go edit this list and say more notes. And so the list has been changed. When I go back to SharePoint here, I'm sorry, Excel, and hit refresh, we'll see that more notes should pop up. And I've got a little and there we go. So more notes has shown up in the spreadsheet. If you don't like this, you can disconnect it so that if you want a static copy, maybe for archival purposes, you want to know the status of this project tracker at a point in time, we've got the ability to disconnect and remove that particular link. But this is pretty slick to be able to export these changes. The only issue with this process is it's a one-direction process. If I make a change here in Excel, this is not going to push these changes back again into SharePoint. This is a one-direction read-only sort of process. So another capability to be aware of is that I can open any SharePoint list or library with access. So I'll go and click that, and once again some security warnings. You see the dialog here offers to link the data or copy the data, and I've chosen to link the data. And so here I have a Microsoft Access database, and you see the same list of information is here, but this time it is actually changeable. So I'm going to type changes from Access here. Come on. So there I changed the job reference number here to a couple of X's, and if I go back up to SharePoint here and refresh this list, we'll see that we've got some X's here in that job ref. So Microsoft Access is offering a round trip here. Changes come down, and I see them. Any changes that I make go back up again. And the beauty of this model here is that I have the ability to create data entry forms and so on. So if I want to go and create a more sophisticated data entry experience for my user, I can do so. Maybe I can add additional text into here so that if my users are having to do a ton of data entry and there's some complicated business rules about what's going on here, I can go and add additional comments in here about how this thing is supposed to be used, etc. I can put sophisticated validations here with VBA programming behind the scenes, so if I need to have 30 or 40 lines of sophisticated calculations and stuff, something that SharePoint out of the box just doesn't do very well, all of this stuff is available here. We also have the ability to do pretty sophisticated reporting in Microsoft Access. So we've got the whole report wizard here that can help me produce a sophisticated control break, subtotals, totals type of reporting. We also have the ability to link to other sources. So perhaps these customers are in my ERP system, and that ERP system is Microsoft SQL Server based, for example. I could join this SharePoint list to a SQL Server table and perform reporting and stuff that crosses both SharePoint and ERP data. I do this all the time for customers. They absolutely love it. I can do queries that do heterogeneous joins across multiple different sources. All of this stuff inside of Access. Right, we also have the ability to export people and task lists into Outlook, open stuff with Microsoft Project. There are lots of other integration possibilities that I won't demonstrate here today, but they're all available to you. And so definitely explore it, play around with it. You'd be surprised at what you're able to do. All right, you'll often find in spreadsheets that there's a massive amount of color coding going on. And the reason for that is typically there's way too much information in a tracking spreadsheet, and color is used to draw people's attention to critical areas. The reason that we need to draw people's attention to areas is that there's only a single view in a spreadsheet. Only a spreadsheet, when somebody hits save, there's a certain ordering of the rows, a certain ordering of the columns, the widths are set a certain way, and that's it. And if I go in and make changes to make the spreadsheet easier for me to use, it's kind of dangerous, because if somebody opens that spreadsheet not realizing that I've sorted or filtered it, it's not obvious sometimes that you're not seeing all of the information. And so people, again, use color to try to mitigate that. The answer and here's an example, sorry, of a typical example here where we've got a huge amount of information going on, very difficult to keep track of all this. People have to move. In fact, there are so many columns. This is a real honest-to-goodness case study we're going to be talking about in a moment. People had to move rows from the in progress to watching to complete tabs because there's simply too many columns in the single spreadsheet for people to keep track of it. They had used color coding to help draw people's attention to the right stuff. And so typical example of that. The features that we need to take advantage of in SharePoint to mitigate this are sort of our next topic here. And number one here is the ability to have multiple different views of any given list. So unlike an Excel spreadsheet, I can have as many views as there are roles in the organization. So I can show columns, reorder the columns, change the sorting, filtering, and so on. So let's take a look at that. Imagine that this list had hundreds and hundreds of items in it, and it was getting really difficult to tell what's going on. So I want to go and maybe filter this just to show the tasks that are assigned to me. I can go and click the Save This View button here and make it into a personal item, or make it public so everybody can see it. So I can decide that maybe for me personally it's handy to see this view set up this way, or I can say, hey, everybody should be able to see that. So let's do this. I'll say we'll create a view here called the there we go. We'll call this the Acme view. And now it's a simple matter of switching between showing all of the items or just the Acme items and so on. There are much more sophisticated view capabilities here, so let's take a quick gander at that. I'm going to switch to a more sophisticated option here. I'm going to go and choose to create a completely new view. Make it a standard type of view. Many different view formats to choose from. We'll call this the By Customer view. make it public for everybody to see. I don't really need to display the customer in this particular one, and I'll explain about that in a moment. We don't really want to see notes and budget in this particular view. I'm just making this up. And I would like to move the assigned to more up front and center to make that the first thing that everybody sees, and so on, so I can change which columns are displayed and in what order, do different forms of sorting, different kinds of filtering, and the one I want to show you here is the grouping capability. So I'm going to group this by customer and hit OK. And now we see that here is the all items view, and then if I want to see a view of this by customer, you'll see that we've got a roll-up sort of behavior going on with accounts for the different tasks there. And in this particular view, I got rid of the budgets, I got rid of the notes, and I moved the assigned to out in front. This is something you simply cannot do in an Excel spreadsheet. If I were working with this project tracker, I could perform different grouping and sorting capabilities, but once I hit save, everybody sees it in that mode. And if somebody doesn't like that particular arrangement, they're going to have to undo all those changes that I made to put the view back to the way they like it. Not necessary when we're taking advantage of these SharePoint features. All right, other areas for integration. Again, this is something that Excel can't do. We've already seen the people in the group picker. This allows us to grab not only individuals out of our directory listing, but also groups as well. So if I want to assign a task to everybody in the accounting group, I can do that. I can perform lookups into other lists. Technically, this is possible in Excel, but very few people bother doing it. It's a very sophisticated action in Excel that's beyond the skills of most people, and the folks that have done it often are quite annoyed when the links break. So if I've got 3 or 4 different spreadsheet tabs that reference one another, or individual spreadsheet files that reference one another, these things are quite difficult to pull off. And I already mentioned the Outlook integration. So again, these are all things that SharePoint can do that Excel cannot. And then lastly, we have an alerting mechanism. At the start of the presentation, one of the complaints I made about Excel is that the spreadsheet just sits there like a lump out on a disk drive somewhere, and if there's critical things happening inside that spreadsheet, nobody knows unless they open the spreadsheet and look at it. So in SharePoint, we have a sophisticated alerting mechanism that we can take advantage of. So let's see that here. Here I'm looking at my list of items here, and I noticed that there's something here that's been assigned to Zach, and he's way overdue on this thing, or he's going to be overdue on it. So I can go and say that I would like to create an alert on this thing, and I'll say that myself and Jerry here both need to know about changes to this thing. I want to get in. We want email messages. If anything changes on this, and we want to get a notification immediately. Or perhaps just the opposite here, I don't need to know about this stuff literally as it happens. I'm going to go over to the list mode here, and I'm going to set up an alert on the list overall and say that once a week on Fridays at 2 in the afternoon, I want to get a summary of all of the changes that have been made to this, or maybe just new items. All right, so Fridays at 2, I get a list of all of the new items that were added, just to keep me up to date. Maybe I got a standing 3 afternoon meeting I want to be ready for, and I want to know what changed in this list. All right, so I can set up alerts to help me keep track of individual items that might be changed, as well as changes to the list. And again, this happens automatically. This is not anything that you have to be monitoring yourself. Much superior to fooling around with spreadsheets. All right, to get the best out of SharePoint, it depends a lot on the service model that's in place. So got a poll question here for you. I would like to know, what is the service model for those of you that have SharePoint what's going on. So Lyman, if you could throw up the service model, there you go. On-premise, online, hybrid, and none at all. Okay, things are settling down here. All right, sure, go ahead and throw up the results if you would. And so we see that we've got the little slight majority of you are up there with on-premise only. Some are online only, and the rest are hybrid. And nobody wants to admit that there was no SharePoint in their organization just yet. Okay, so those of you who are doing the on-premises versions of SharePoint are going to have a much easier time doing integration with it. When SharePoint is internal to your organization, it can be integrated much more readily with the rest of your enterprise software applications. SharePoint Online, however, is coming on strong. Years ago when it was first rolled out, it was quite difficult to get meaningful integration, but over the years, Microsoft has really opened that model up pretty substantially, and we're able to integrate it quite handily, even though it's out there in the cloud. All right, so what I want to do next is take you through a case study that really is probably our best Excel tracking spreadsheet migration we've ever done. Orthopedic healthcare organization with a number of different facilities around Minneapolis and outstate. They have a process that's driven by a spreadsheet with over 50 columns, hundreds of different rows, and that was the example I had shown you before where they were just really suffering under the hassles of keeping that thing up to date. So we converted their entire process to a single SharePoint list with a dozen different views that really streamlined the operation. And so here is the general information view. We've gotten rid of any privacy-based fields, so a lot of this stuff's going to look pretty abstract because we didn't want to show you any live useful patient information here. Each role in the organization gets a view, and some of them has several views that optimize the information for their particular role. So if you're an orthopedic practitioner, we want to be able to quickly let you see the columns in that list that are relevant for you. So we see here that Dan and Sean only have 6 active items right now, and so Bob here is kind of maxed out possibly. So if I'm a coordinator and I'm going to assign somebody a new patient or something, I can see at a glance who's in what sort of state. Now, a manager type person has a different kind of view where we use a heavy color coding to help draw attention to a problem, since we've got perhaps a cost estimation process is way behind here, and somebody's going to have to step up and clear some of these statuses. So again, instead of using a single spreadsheet where everybody has to try to pull their personal information out of there, everybody gets their own view of that process. Here's another view. These are the delivery folks. They do not need to see in-progress operations. They don't need to see patient intake information. When they're ready to deliver an orthopedic product, they have a much smaller set of information, and so they get, again, an optimal view of what they need to see. All right, so another common management phenomena when you're using, whether it's an Excel tracking spreadsheet or SharePoint list or whatever, are people are asking you about statuses and so on. So we've already kind of seen that SharePoint has that alerting mechanism. This is when I was meant to do the demo, so I kind of prematurely demoed here the tracking alerting mechanisms. But back in the orthopedic process here, they have a number of alerts that are set up to make sure that people don't actually have to sit watching this screen. If I'm part of the delivery mechanism, I don't have to sit here and try to refresh this screen over and over again waiting for a random event to show up. Alerts automatically get sent whether I'm monitoring this process or not. If something gets overdue, the manager can get an alert letting them know that something is overdone. So that way we don't have to continually pester people asking them what's going on. SharePoint can automate that process. All right, another common challenge that folks have is that there are business rules that need to be followed. There's only one correct way to handle a case in a particular state. And then we have changes to the policy. I know we used to do it that way, but we've changed our mind and now we do it a slightly different way. We always need approvals except, right? There's always exceptions to these business rules as well. And that's why trying to use a static list management process is difficult when you're in a changing environment like this. And so one of the coolest features of migrating to SharePoint for business process management is that we have a sophisticated workflow engine that is accessible to non-technical people. Now, I don't want to say it's just your average end user just picks up the workflow engine and goes to town with it, but you don't need an expensive .NET developer. You don't need somebody with years and years of software development experience to take advantage of the workflow engine. We have sophisticated if-then type logic, complex calculations. We can do routing and alerting and so on out of these workflows. Workflows can be manually started, so somebody can decide, hey, this particular list item needs this process applies to it. We can launch a workflow automatically anytime somebody attaches a new item to a list. We can launch workflows when a change is made to a list. Here's an example of a workflow item. It involves a business rule that says if we're shipping outside the U.S. Via shipper number 3, we need to add 12 hours to the required date because it's extra paperwork, extra processing time, and so we're going to add some additional hours to the date, and then we're also going to go and assign a shipping coordinator task because the shipments going outside the U.S. have additional steps that need to be done, and the coordinator has those tasks assigned to them. So this is an example of a business rule that nobody has to remember to follow, right? It just happens automatically anytime a new order is placed, and then we can make changes to this. So that maybe it's not that it's outside the U.S., that it's outside the U.S. and it weighs over a certain number of pounds, or perhaps the dollar value exceeds some upper limit and it requires an approval of some sort. I can manipulate this business rule at will over time without having to circulate a memo to everybody saying, please make these changes. All right, another area that SharePoint really excels here is the ability for transparency and accountability for all of the different list items. The Excel spreadsheet being a file-based system really talks about the file being created by a certain person on a certain date and time, or modified in general by somebody, and no real versioning and so on. Well, list items in SharePoint have a complete history of who created and when, who modified and when. I showed you the versioning information. When workflows run, there's a complete workflow history of who started the workflow, what steps were taken, what's the disposition at the end of the workflow. Perhaps something was approved, something was declined, something had to be reviewed. All of this information is tracked in SharePoint behind the scenes. So it makes people performing a business process together, people collaborating together, have much more transparency over what's going on, and it's a lot more measurable as well. because of all of these changes being available to us, we can also look for bottlenecks. We have a customer that had a HR onboarding process that had been tracked not in a spreadsheet but on a whiteboard at the headquarters. So imagine you had to sit in the hallway where this giant whiteboard was located to figure out where a candidate was in the hiring process. We converted that to a SharePoint process, and they cut out a full week out of their 3-week onboarding process was eliminated simply because they identified bottlenecks. People had no idea that they were waiting on somebody else to get a task done, and so we were able to sequence things, do things in parallel rather than serially, like I said, eliminated an entire week out of their onboarding process just because of this accountability that was available on an item-by-item basis. All right, so far we've been focusing on individual lists and views in those individual lists, and that is awesome for getting started. But when you want to take it to the next level, most of our customers appreciate a number of dashboards being put together. Dashboards assemble information from multiple lists and optimize it by role to have the most important information available on the screen. And the idea is the dashboard organizes the data for action so that somebody can glance at the dashboard and decide, hey, here's something important that I've got to get done, here's something I need to do. So let's take a look at a few. This is our favorite success story for dashboards. There's a large heavy equipment repair depot here in Minneapolis, and they have a number of people out on a giant shop floor that have different things they're doing to giant graders and excavators and that sort of thing. And they have a problem where they have an underutilization of people. They have expensive technicians that they need to have utilized properly. And they also had an issue with parts. You know, somebody was realized that, hey, we've got a part that's not in yet, and I can't do my task with this part missing. And so they again had a spreadsheet that a person in the back office kept track of, and that individual would have to notice a problem and text or email somebody to alert them of it. And if they weren't watching their email or didn't have their phone handy to receive the text, they wouldn't see what was going on. So we created a series of related SharePoint lists to do all of the different tracking that we've been talking about. And then we consolidated all that information into the screen that you're seeing here, and they put a giant 50-inch monitor, flat screen monitor up in the service bay so that everybody can see what's going on. So for example, up in the upper right corner here, Matt Klatt is completely idle. He's waiting in parts for every single task he's got today. Somebody's got to expedite this because Matt's not going to get anything done. And we noticed that over on the Tim Davis side, he's got lots of stuff to do today, and you know, he's got a task there that's not been started, so Matt should be asked to go over and help Tim get that thing accomplished. And so the guys can just look up at this model and basically start managing themselves, right? If you notice that you're waiting on parts, you can go and talk to the expediter. If you see that somebody's getting behind and you're got nothing going on until the parts show up, you can go and ask your manager, hey, I can help them out. So this really revolutionized the way things are going on in that organization. Here's another dashboard we did for a customer. This draws list items from a wide variety of different lists into one spot, each of them filtered and sorted to make the most important information available. We had to kind of fake this up because, you know, customers don't really want their real live data floating around in webinar demos, so it doesn't look terribly impressive. But we're able to draw information from lots of different places into one spot. So if a manager is curious about the North Star client, what's going on with North Star, they just enter in the client name, hit the go button, and they get, bam, a view of all of the critical information that they need to see. All right, so that is our presentation today. I'm going to take questions momentarily, but I want to spend just a second here and talk to you about our offer. First 6 folks here that respond, you can send us either an email to bpoffer@altaconsulting.com or give Jerry a call at that number. We're going to take one of your business process spreadsheets. You pick it. You decide what you think is a good candidate, and we'll convert it to a SharePoint-based list for free and give you a whirl. The reason that I'm willing to make this offer, frankly, is I know once you've seen this, you're going to want a lot more of this. So I'm taking the risk here that once you've seen this process in action, you're going to love it, and you're going to want to more and more and more. Okay, so I've got a list of questions here that we've accumulated over the hour here. So I'll just sort of take them here. First one is, my IT department is backlogged. Do you have recommendations to get up and running with SharePoint quickly? All right, yeah, so if you have a backlogged IT group and they're reluctant to deploy SharePoint, or they're reluctant to give you any kind of SharePoint resources, the SharePoint Online, everything I demoed today was done through the online product. So you saw SharePoint Online in action doing all the things that I just demonstrated. That is something that you as a private individual can just power up a SharePoint Online solution. It's a couple of bucks a month per user, and you don't need IT to help you do that. Anybody can go through that process and set it up. And in fact, a lot of our customers, when we engage them on SharePoint, even if they have an on-premise SharePoint, we'll still start off online modeling and demoing stuff to them on our online resources. All right, next. We believe we're going to have to evaluate our spreadsheets on a case-by-case basis to see if it makes sense to convert to SharePoint. How do you determine which spreadsheets provide the best conversion ROI? Wow. Yeah, we were searching online to try to find maybe a Gartner research study or something that said, you know, here's the number of spreadsheets that are typically used in organizations for business process tracking. We just didn't find anything definitive. So we're guessing that there's dozens of these types of things going on in most organizations, even smaller organizations, and not all of them make sense to convert. And so I would say the number one thing about ROI in SharePoint is how many different people are integrated into that business process, and how often do they have to communicate status information to one another. And so if there's just 2 people messing with a spreadsheet and they really only talk about it once or twice a month, that's probably not a good candidate for making changes. But if you've got a dozen people who are looking at that spreadsheet and they're on a daily basis talking to one another about what's going on, all right? If you schedule meetings around changes to that spreadsheet, that is definitely going to be a cost-effective switch over to SharePoint. So again, the summary there would be multiple people with frequent communication. That's the sweet spot. That's the one that I want to start with. All right. Is versioning turned on each item in the list? Yeah, versioning is not enabled by default. It's a simple click of your mouse. You just go into the advanced, the settings of the list. There's a versioning area. You just turn it on, and then each individual item is versioned absolutely. That's pretty easy to turn on. Can you do calculations similar to Excel? I would put a huge asterisk on that and say similar. You can do adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. You can do functions like adding days to dates and so on. So there's a huge list of functions available in SharePoint, but they are maybe 1% of what's available in Excel. Excel has a massive calculation library. You know, it's really incomparable, but I would say that reasonable calculations that work on a single row at a time, that do simple functions and things, those are all there. So that's part of that evaluation process. and not everything makes sense. When we do need to do ridiculously complicated calculations, that's when we pitch it over to Microsoft Access. Actually has the Excel engine available to it, so we can do that there. How do you get the colors to appear in lists in SharePoint 2013? Yeah, I knew that was going to be a question. That's not an out-of-box feature, although it's not rocket science. Microsoft, for reasons only known to Microsoft, removed color coding capabilities in their standard lists. So we just add them right back in again with a little JavaScript and some CSS magic. Again, it's not rocket science, but I would call it an out-of-box feature with some customization. Okay. This sounds like a great solution, but our users don't like change. How have other companies been successful in gaining adoption? I hear you. That's probably our biggest barrier to success with SharePoint is trying to get an entire organization to lurch forward in a new way instantly. In fact, we just no longer even recommend it. Years ago, we used to try to do whole enterprise type rollouts of SharePoint, and it's just, we don't think it's a good idea to be that aggressive. So what we do is we identify some enthusiastic early adopters with a business problem that SharePoint solves well, and build them a dashboard, build them a tracking spreadsheet, get them going, and incrementally make a success. After a couple of departments have been converted like this, the buzz starts to develop that, hey, you know, what you guys are using SharePoint, how did you do that? And suddenly by the end of the year, 90% of the enterprise is using SharePoint for business process tracking. But there's no way that you can interview everybody in January, for example, and say, hey, by March and April, we're going to have everybody converted. I don't see that happening very often. So again, the answer is incremental progress with enthusiastic early adopters. That's the way to get people excited about SharePoint. How important is it to upgrade the most recent SharePoint version or move to Office 365 SharePoint Online to get the functionality and user friendliness Craig is showing today? If you've got an older version of SharePoint, say the 2010 version, pretty much everything we covered today is available in the older versions of SharePoint. So it's not critical that you upgrade to get this. I think the most critical thing is to start utilizing SharePoint in any capacity at all, and then you can start justifying upgrades and so on. Office 365 and SharePoint Online simply are easier for people to use, especially distributed groups of people who are in multiple different locations that aren't in the same office complex. They benefit greatly from Office 365 and SharePoint. But if you're already using SharePoint, if you've already got SharePoint installed but it's in a slightly older version, that's not going to prevent you from taking advantage of this. Everything that we've talked about today works pretty similar to how it worked in SharePoint 2010. Another question, how was the dashboard built? I'm assuming you're talking about the trucking, the heavy equipment repair depot one. SharePoint lists are typically arranged the way I've been demoing them, but that's not the only way to visualize them. SharePoint has a number of different display modes that lists can be put in, and there is a card/tile sort of list presentation, and that's the one that we used in that particular screen. So even though you've never seen a list composed that way, that doesn't mean that that's the only way that they can be composed. And so that particular one was a fairly complicated page put together, had multiple different coordinated and linked web parts with the lists configured for that sort of tile type presentation. But that was an out-of-box solution except for the color coding, and the color coding again was done with some cascading style sheets and a little bit of JavaScript, and it's done on SharePoint Online. So I consider it an out-of-box use of the product, but not, you know, it's a little bit more sophisticated version. All right, question, can you report on the versioning information stored in SharePoint? Yes, you technically can report on the versioning information. However, it's not an obvious out-of-box functionality. The versioning information is available to people who know how to program against the SharePoint API. And so that's how we do sophisticated reporting. There's a type of a query you can do against SharePoint lists, and if you're a software developer with a moderate skill set, you can put some queries together that can extract that information. But SharePoint out of the box will only show you that information one list item or document item at a time, unfortunately. All right, how do you typically set up the sites for these BPM workflows and filter out the BPM workflows that are applicable and not applicable to staff? Well, SharePoint doesn't really have a lot of control over workflows, and so if a workflow exists and you have the rights to the list, you can see you can see the workflow and see the information about it. And so what we do in cases like that is we take advantage of obscurity. It's not security, it's just obscurity. We'll put a custom page together with a custom ribbon bar, and this is something that SharePoint Designer is capable of producing custom ribbons. So it's a little bit beyond an information worker solution, but it's certainly a power user capable sort of thing. And we'll just sort of put a dashboard together, we'll put a page together that only shows the information that a particular role should have. So if there's a approval and review process that I don't want a clerical user to be able to launch, I can't really prevent that person from ever getting to that. But I can certainly give them a landing page that clerical people go to get their work done, and the workflows simply aren't apparently visible to them. But if you really do need, from a security perspective, to literally prevent the person from ever being able to launch that workflow, we're going to have to partition that list and use a different security model and have maybe two lists that have to be used in conjunction to carry that off. So some of these questions are kind of complicated to answer easily, and so if I don't answer effectively, if you want more information, just send Jerry an email at that email address on the screen here, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you offline. And I'm getting a note here that we're out of time, and they really want me to wrap this up. So there's a ton of questions coming up about the colors. I know everybody wants to know how to do that, and we just don't have time to go into that. I'd be happy to handle these things offline. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for attending. It was a great audience with lots of great questions, so it meant you're paying attention. I appreciate that. And we'll just sign off now and address any additional questions offline later on. So thanks again for attending. See you next time.